Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, Divorced my cheating wife and went out with a girl 10 years younger than her. I caught my wife cheating on me. We had been married for 14 years, had a nice home, kids, cars, a big bank account. Overall a very nice life. When I confronted her, she couldn't even deny it. I had rock-solid proof. I filed for divorce. She didn't want to talk about it. She only wanted half of our assets and to leave. The guy she was seeing was very well off. She thought she would be taken care of. I filed the divorce and wrote the terms myself. She was really getting screwed now. She yelled it wasn't fair, it's not equal, extremely one-sided. I kept the house, the RV, most of our savings, and no alimony. She said she would never accept it and to get ready for a court fight. She then loudly informed me that we were in a no-fault state and that the evidence I had collected was not admissible in court. I replied that I wasn't going to show the courts the evidence, I was going to show the kids. She turned white, got up, and walked away. About 3 to 4 hours later she came back and asked me, so I accept that, you won't show the kids? I promised I wouldn't if she just packed her stuff and left. 3 weeks later she moved out. I later found out that her mister sent her packing too. About 8 to 9 months later I met a gorgeous blonde, about 10 years younger than my wife. We hit it off very well. She and I went out shopping one day and as we were leaving the store we walked right into my ex-wife, whose jaw dropped when she saw my new girl, who was younger, taller, prettier. I think I had a crap-eating grin on my face for days. Next one is titled, My wife broke the news about our bully neighbor's wife having an affair with his brother. We were living in the projects and the father in the family, Jerry, at the end of our unit was a drunk and a bully. Jerry would bully everyone at any chance he got. The guy had arms like telephone poles, so I sure couldn't stand up against him, so I had to find little ways to get even with him. Their bedroom was on the first floor and in the summertime, they would leave their windows open with a fan in the window drawing air in. My father had a sporting goods store, so one day I purchased 2 bottles of skunk scent. I waited until one day when they weren't home and I sprayed both bottles of skunk scent directly into the fan that was drawing air into their bedroom. I worked late at night at the time and I didn't get home until around 3 a.m. one night. After arriving home, I poured 5 gallons of water into Jerry's gas tank. One night after dark I found out that Jerry was passed out drunk up in the field. I put my steel-toe work boots on and a hooded sweatshirt. I quietly snuck up on Jerry and kicked him in the face as hard as I could with those steel-toe boots. I ran in a different direction from my home and visited a friend for a couple of hours before going home. The best revenge was from my wife. Every morning after Jerry would leave for work, Jerry's brother would arrive at the house, and with the bedroom being on the first floor and the windows open, you could clearly hear Jerry's brother having sex with Jerry's wife. Jerry's son was constantly bullying my son on the way to school, so my wife went over to complain to Jerry and his wife. Jerry's wife answered the main door but had the storm door locked and was talking to my wife through the door. I don't know how the conversation started, but Jerry's wife called my wife a witch. My wife loudly said, "You of all people have the nerve to call me a witch? You, the witch that we can hear ducking your husband's brother every morning after your husband leaves for work?" All hell broke loose right then and there. It was not only vocal, you could hear furniture flying. To make it worse, about 10 minutes later Jerry's brother came to visit. Before he could even make it in the house, the two were fist fighting out on the sidewalk. My wife immediately called the police and both were arrested. Next one is titled, Jealous Coworker Lost Her Job Because She Didn't Want to Work With Me. I started a job as a supervisor of a VIP breakfast lounge in an upscale hotel. One of my coworkers approached me the first hour, to say she wouldn't work with so-and-so because they were so lazy. I promised to carefully observe and address it if needed, but the girl she identified was never lazy. She worked hard as well. Fast forward, this girl who on my first day demanded not to work with another person, lies constantly, reiterates information to my team as though I said it when I did not, and overall just had a problem with authority. Everything I recommended, she questioned or argued about. Even things that I made clear to her that came from upper management were debated. Someone finally explained to me, months into the job, that she was annoyed because she had applied for a supervisor role but instead they'd given it to me. And she thought I was absolutely retarded and did not want to work beneath me. I remained professional with her and didn't react to the information. It gave context, but I had no other use for it. In the end, she went to upper management and repeated all of her complaints about the millionth time. You see, little did I know, but she'd been reporting my mistakes, lies, misrepresentations, and a tiny bit of truth the entire time we had been working together. This time, however, she added that she wouldn't work with me and handed in her notice. Well, the joke was on her because a week later, when she saw they weren't going to fire me just to keep her, she stated she wanted to rescind her notice. Management then asked me if they should allow her to rescind her notice. I admitted that I felt she was negative energy within the team and really had hurt morale. That I had been looking forward to things improving and running smoother, and everyone relaxing, and that in fact, the team didn't want her either. They were over the petty drama. And since I had been professional, silent, and not petty the whole time, they took my word for it. So, they didn't let her rescind her notice. Little did she know, I had already gotten another job offer and wouldn't be around to deal with her or not, whether she stayed or left. Once she was finally officially removed from the company, I gave my notice. Management joked, "Hey, maybe Olga will come back?" But they didn't invite her. In fact, she couldn't find another job in beautiful Austin, so she had to move back to Arizona. And that's what happens when jealousy literally ruins crap for you. Next one is titled, "The Principal Who Bullied Our Son Finally Got His Karma After 2 Years." It was all about our son's middle school, some really bad, lazy teachers who played favorites and the even lazier principal who protected them by lying and blaming our son, a 12-year-old. One teacher refused to give boys the grades they deserved and instead focused on the girls alone. Another was so old she was demented and kept losing our son's work, resulting in low marks. In maths, teachers must meet with parents at their request, by law, but these two creeps refused. Finally, someone got them to meet with us only if the principal or assistant principal was there. The one who only liked girls refused outright, so we filed a complaint. No matter what they did, the principal kept backing them up and blaming us or our son unfairly. Finally, after they cancelled a few meetings or just didn't show up, my husband resorted to storming into the principal's office, even interrupting his meetings. He's not a violent guy but very tall and strong looking. When angry, his face is quite scary, so I'm guessing that's why they listened to him and not me. But it still didn't result in improvement for our son. They struck back by losing all his doctor's notes for absences. He had a chronic bronchial condition. The doctor was asked to resubmit the notes so many times by us that finally, they said they would no longer do it, that it was pointless. They were right, and suggested that we send copies by registered, return receipt mail. We did. Then, the jerks put our son on the truant list and we had to go before the district attorney. When we presented our evidence, he was so disgusted that he chewed out the assistant principal. The principal didn't even show, threw him out, and threatened to fine him. He took our son's name off the list. I filed a formal complaint against the principal with the State Department of Education. They called and asked a few questions, then said they would investigate. I also got the same notice in writing. We were getting desperate and luckily, a new charter school was about to open. The admittance was by lottery and after attending an info session, we signed our son up. He got in and off he went, to a much better school. He also managed to get several of his friends to ditch the horrible city school and go to the charter school as well. Someone actually called us from the superintendents to complain and I told them to stuff it, that they brought this on themselves. A couple of years went by and I got one notice from the DOE that their investigation was almost complete. I figured it would amount to nothing. But one day I picked up the paper and on the front page was an article about angry teachers protesting the firing of the principal. He was canned a few months shy of retirement, without a pension. You can't imagine the joy I felt. I'm not prone to schadenfreude, but this was like a religious experience. I laughed with amazement as I showed the article to my husband and son. We couldn't believe how many teachers claimed that this guy was a great guy and so dedicated. Blah blah blah. Dedicated to covering their butts is the actual story. The town buzzed for months with news of this, both for and mostly against him. I've never met anyone who deserved firing more than this guy. He never gave a damn about the pain he caused our son, so why care about him? It took over 2 years, but yes, revenge was so sweet. Next one is titled, Boss who fired me years ago became a worker under my supervision, so I fired him then. Way back in 1974 I was drilling morning tour on Parker Drilling Company's Rig 86. We got a new relief tool pusher and he was a dick. He professed himself to be a born-again Christian and informed me he was offended by the way my crew talked to him. I told him if he had anything to say to my crew to come to me and I would tell them. 2 days later he fired me and my crew. The day before being fired I bought a brand new crew car. I later learned that he had been planning to run me off for a month and was only waiting for an old friend of his to become available. Fast forward to 1984, 10 years later. I am now a drilling superintendent for Exxon Co. USA. We are now 2 years into Reaganism and the oil field is dying a slow death. The number of active drilling rigs has plunged. In Oklahoma, the count has dropped from over 700 rigs to under 70. Because of the slowdown, I am without a permanent assignment and my operations superintendent has me working vacation relief. So for my upcoming work week, I am being sent up to western Oklahoma on a deep gas well. The contractor drilling the well is Parker Drilling Company. Guess who the Parker tool pusher is? You probably guessed right. I was relieving my brother, an Exxon senior superintendent. Knowing me as he did, he'd made up a list of all the infractions that the rig was out of contract compliance with. These are kind of things for which you can shut down the drilling operations, taking the rig off the payroll until the infraction is brought into compliance. It was a long list. So Nemesis was now in my grip and like Ahab, I was determined to do him in. My brother was barely out of sight when I called out on the intercom for the tool pusher. "What do you want?" came a surly reply. "Who's speaking?" I asked. "This is the driller." I asked for the tool pusher. "He's up here in the doghouse." "Can he hear me?" "Yes." "Good. Toolie, I want to talk to you, so you need to come to my office and it would behoove you to be most pronto." As I expected, he took his time before entering my office. "You wanted me?" "Not exactly. As a matter of fact, I don't want you. I want you off this location. I've already talked to your supervisor and he said to tell you to be sure to bring all your personal belongings with you." 2 weeks later I had the added satisfaction of running him off another Exxon location in West Virginia. The wheels of Retribution grind slow, but they grind fine. Next one is titled, Bully Coworker Spent Weeks Looking for the Source of the Smell of Urine in Her Office. I have had the opportunity to ply my creative skills in the art of vengeance on many occasions in my youth. However, as an adult, I felt that there were better ways to handle things. I then reminded myself that there is a season for everything. Some people don't understand anything but a dose of their own medicine. These people lack the civility to respect other people or to act in rational ways. I had learned this on the streets long ago but hoped that I had risen into a new social structure. I was teaching in a small rural school when the harassment started, from a coworker. She was a support person in the building. Her child was one of my students. On my first day of school, I would always send home a small pamphlet of expectations for classwork and class behavior. It was to be signed by parents and students, and then returned. This procedure would save drama later on in the school year, when a child or parent would claim that Johnny or Susie didn't know better or understand. This coworker came to me and told me that their child would not be following several of my rules in the pamphlet after school on the first day. My first question was, why? I was then told the reason their child would not be following the rules: they don't like the rules. Like it or not, my rules stand without a valid reason why they shouldn't. I explained to the mother, citing several examples where I would be willing to make adjustments, for valid reasons. The mother got mad and said, "You'll be sorry," then stormed off. I thought, what is this, junior high? The first quarter was moving along. This coworker's child had a B+ in my class. I am suddenly called to the office for a meeting after school with my principal, with the coworker, and her husband about picking on their child. That is their claim of why their child's grade is suffering. Wait, a B+ is a good grade. I grade with rubrics allowing students to see what area they lost their points in on assignments. These parents bring in an assignment, I downgrade a section on capitalization. This is the same mistake that this child has repeatedly made, the same error, has been spoken to about, been warned to make the corrections, and chooses not to fix the capitalization issue. I explain that their child told me they were not going to correct their capitalization. These parents wanted me to let their child have a pass on capitalization. I told them I couldn't do that because of state guidelines. The co-worker, mum, changed subjects, digressing into a rant about having the children write journal entries every day. The meeting spirals on, both parents are calling me names, my principal does nothing about it, I walk out of the meeting. They didn't want to help their child's education. They just wanted to be able to bully an A out of me. The co-worker pulled her child from my class, hiring a private teacher for her child. I would think that would be the end of this nightmare parent. Nope. She programmed spyware on my computer, leaking all of my confidential student files. This co-worker then began a phone campaign in the community to get me fired, telling everyone I leaked confidential student information. She physically shoved me from behind in the hall one day, when my hands were full, then laughed. If that wasn't enough, she called the cops on me while I was at work, telling them I was intoxicated in front of my students. The police came and did a sobriety test in front of my students. This was the final straw of her bullying me. I had already turned in my resignation. Not because of her nonsense, I had health reasons. I decided to have a little fun. I had figured out months before, she was a drug dependent. This was going to be to my advantage in my revenge plot against this wretch. She was also very predictable in her schedule, she did the same routines like clockwork every day. She had an office at the back of the library. My classroom had a back door into the library. If the library was locked, I could still get in there. The plan for revenge was writing itself. I have always maintained connections to people that know well. The idea is drawn out. One of the connections was to the one thing she wanted and needed, meth. I didn't want her cut off, I wanted the price raised, the dealer to act as if there was a shortage for some bogus reason. If the dealer's profit margin was getting affected, they wouldn't be game, but raising the price solved that problem. The idea was to keep her on edge, never satisfied, ever. Once I had that accomplished, I moved to the next step. I went to the pet shop, bought 24 feeder crickets, released them into her office. I sprinkled itching powder on all her books and papers, knowing she would move them looking for the little noisemakers. I picked the thermostat lockbox in her office, then turned it up to 95 degrees. She was always wearing long sleeves to cover her track marks from shooting up. She shed her sleeves in the sweltering heat until someone could adjust her thermostat. Somehow, it kept getting turned back up to 95 degrees. The next thing I did is diabolical, but it tipped the scale for people in the community to realize she was a drug dependent. I put buck lure, female concentrated deer urine, on pantoliners. Why pantoliners? Pantoliners have an absorbent side and an adhesive side, both of which served my devious purpose. On the underside of her desk, I placed a liner. Inside the file cabinet on the topmost underside, a liner. I placed half a dozen liners in her office. In the final act, I painted the keyboard with a Q-tip with the deer urine. She had looked all over, couldn't figure out where the odor was coming from in her office. She had to get her work done in her sweaty oven of an office. This made her fingertips moist, picking up the deer urine off the keyboard when she typed. The more she looked for the scent and the crickets, the more itching powder she came into contact with on her hands. The hotter she became, the more reactive the powder. The more she scratched her skin, the more she spread the powder. All of these things had her walking around the school and town like a frazzled ball of nerves. She began walking around school with her track marks showing, itching, complaining about bugs, and compulsively smelling her fingers. After 2 weeks, the whole town knew she was a strung-out mess. I just revealed to everyone who she was under her fake facade. Last one is titled, Sneaked a Pair of Women's Underwear in the Gossiper's Car. About 30 years ago, I worked for a steel fabrication company as a production floor leadman. There was a woman working as a welder, and her husband Mike and brother-in-law also worked there. We were all friends at work but never really socialized much outside of work. Anyway, Daphne ended being assigned to my crew, so we worked together a lot and we got along well as friends, but never anything more than that. Well, there was one guy working at the other end of the building who liked to spread gossip and stir up crap. So naturally, he spread stories about me and Daphne sneaking off to the compressor room and elsewhere for quickies. Mike heard about that, knew it was not true and wanted to punch out the gossiper, so I stopped him and said that I have an idea. The gossiper was on his fourth wife, having some self-induced bad luck with wives because he liked to stray. Wife number 4 kept her thumb on him pretty well. She also did all the chores around the house, washed and waxed their car, and everything, at least according to her husband. They also had a bad habit of ticking off neighbors, having been caught as peeping Toms and Tonyas. But it was clear to all who wore the pants in that family. And it was clear that they had way too much time on their hands. So I asked my wife for a pair of panties, explaining to her what I was going to do. But it creeped her out, so we bought a new pair. Gossiper apparently liked chubby women, so we bought a big pair of cheap panties. I opened a can of tuna and applied some juice to the crotch for a nice fishy smell, added a dab of mayonnaise so it would get crusty, and clipped a few curly hairs from the dog. The next day, I slipped out into the parking lot, and Gossiper's car was unlocked. So I kept low in case anyone should look to the parking lot, and I jammed those panties under the front seat passenger side. Then I walked back to the shop. I almost felt guilty, fearing that it could end in a divorce. Nothing happened for a week or so, so I guess Mrs. Gossiper didn't clean the car weekly, or that he found them and tossed them. Well, after about a month, we noticed the Gossiper was eating his lunch with the missus every day. She would drive in at morning coffee, he had to go outside and sit in the car with her. She was back for lunch and he sits with her. And for afternoon coffee, every day for a very long time. And if he was a minute late, she would scream him out. Many people wondered what was up with that, but he didn't say. Finally, after nearly a year of this, Scout's honor, every day for a year, someone asked Gossiper if he had gotten his missus a Valentine card. He said no. She took me to the store to get one. I went in without her, and I guess I took too long because she came in and dragged me out, cussing me out that I was trying to screw all the girls in there. So I couldn't get one. Last year, someone put a pair of stinking panties under my seat, and now she won't even let me eat lunch with her being there to make sure I don't screw anyone. And I got no idea where those came from. I never expected it, but that worked great. Gossiper never gossiped about anyone for quite a long time. I got high -5s from Daphne and Mike for that one. No one that knew of it thought that would work so well. Best revenge I ever engineered. Time wounds all heals. Thanks for listening.